So let's ask the big question right up front. How much power does the global financial system really have over a country? Is it some kind of hidden conspiracy run by people in the shadows? Or is the truth something a lot more complex, something that's woven right into the very fabric of the system itself? Well, in this explainer, we're going to peel back those layers to see how it all actually works.
You've probably heard some version of this story before, right? It's a really compelling one. It goes something like this. These powerful groups intentionally tempt developing nations into taking on just massive loans for huge projects. But the debt becomes a trap. The country gets totally dependent, and then these outside powers can just pull the strings. It's a clean, simple, and honestly, a very powerful story of manipulation.
It is a dramatic claim for sure. But, to really get what's going on, we have to move past those simple stories and actually look at the hard evidence. We need to see how the system operates, day in and day out, in the real world. So to put this whole theory to the test, we need a real-world example. And for decades, Pakistan has been stuck in this repeating cycle of borrowing from international lenders. That makes it, honestly, the perfect case study for us to understand what's really happening behind all the headlines. Okay, so let's start by looking at the reality on the ground. We're going to unpack this predictable and often pretty painful cycle of debt that has really defined Pakistan's economy for generations. What you're looking at here is the machine. It's a mechanical, 8-step process that just repeats itself over and over with this sobering regularity. It all starts with these deep structural weaknesses, like not having enough exports. Then, boom, a crisis hits. Usually they're running out of US dollars. So Pakistan is forced to go to the IMF. The IMF agrees to a loan, but, and this is a big but, it imposes these really tough conditions. This might bring some short-term stability, but the domestic impact, think rising prices, job losses, it's severe. That often leads to political chaos, which just makes things worse, and before you know it, the country is right back at square one, needing another bailout. It is just a relentless loop. And this is the crucial part. This emergency money isn't just handed over, no strings attached. To avoid a complete economic collapse, the government has to agree to this detailed list of policy changes. They're known as conditionalities. So what do these conditions actually look like? Well, they're not just abstract economic ideas. They are policies that hit millions of people right where they live. We're talking about things like removing subsidies on fuel and electricity, which of course makes prices for everything go up, or letting the currency's value just float, which pours fuel on the fire of inflation, and expanding the tax base. These aren't suggestions, you see. They are mandatory requirements to get that loan. Okay, so we've seen the effect this has on one country. Now let's zoom out a bit. Who actually created these institutions? And maybe more importantly, who really holds the power inside this global financial system? So, the system we have today was born way back in 1944 at a conference in a place called Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. World War II was ending, and the Allied nations wanted to build a stable global economy, hoping to prevent future wars. And the result was the creation of two powerhouse institutions, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, and the World Bank. But here is the critical detail. While the official goal was all about global cooperation, the power structure was never, ever equal. See, unlike the UN General Assembly, this is not a one country, one vote kind of system. Not at all. Your influence, your vote, is directly tied to how much money you put in. It's called a quota. The more money you contribute, the more votes you get. Simple as that. And this chart just lays out the result of that structure perfectly. Just look at this. The United States controls roughly 17% of the total votes at the IMF. And to put that into perspective, the next biggest players, Japan and China, have less than half of that. So this massive power imbalance is baked right into the architecture of the whole institution. Now, this is where that 17% becomes incredibly important, because according to the IMF's own rules, any big policy decision needs a supermajority of 85% to actually pass. So just do the math, right? If you need 85% to say yes, and one country controls almost 17% of the vote, well, that country has what's called effective veto power. Nothing of any real consequence can pass without its approval. And that is the ultimate source of power within this entire system. So we've got the economic hitman claim on one side and the on-the-ground reality of Pakistan's cycle and the IMF's structure on the other. Now let's really put them head-to-head and see how the system's reality stacks up against that initial claim. All right, so when we compare them side by side, a much more interesting picture starts to emerge. Do loans create dependency? Well, the evidence from Pakistan's decades-long repeating cycle says that's a strong match. Are policies dictated from the outside? The IMF conditions show that's also a strong match. But what about this idea that countries are actively pushed into debt? Here, it's more of a partial match. Pakistan actively seeks out the loans to avoid a total collapse. And is it all done by some hidden agents? No. The evidence doesn't point to a conspiracy, but to something else, something called structural pressure.
So here's the thing. We don't need to imagine secret backroom meetings or shadowy figures to understand how this system has so much control. The real mechanism at play here is structural pressure. It's this immense force that's put on a country when it has absolutely no other good options. I mean, imagine your only choice is either to accept the IMF's really tough conditions or face a total economic meltdown. An inability to import fuel, medicine, or even food. Is that really a choice at all? And this brings us right to the core insight of this entire explainer. The most powerful kind of control isn't always the one you can see, and it definitely doesn't need some grand conspiracy to work. Let's just say it directly. The most effective control in global finance is not some secret plot that was hatched in a dark room. It's a system that's built with a very specific set of rules, power imbalances, and inherent biases. It's a system that creates this powerful set of constraints that just naturally guides decision-making in one specific direction. Now, this system of control works through three main forces that kind of lock countries in place. First, there's the deep financial dependency, this constant need for foreign currency just to function. Second, there are those non-negotiable policy conditions attached to every single loan. And third, the complete lack of any other viable alternatives when a country is about to default. You put those three together, and you've got a formidable trap. The result of all of this is a condition that you could call conditional sovereignty. Basically, a country is sovereign on paper, it's officially independent, but its actual ability to control its own economic destiny, to set its own budget, its own policies, its own future, is fundamentally compromised. And this quote from our source material just sums it up perfectly. In the end, it almost doesn't matter if the system was designed this way on purpose or if it just kind of evolved. The outcome is exactly the same. Real economic power moves away from elected governments and their people, and it moves toward the institutions of global finance. And this leaves us with a final and, frankly, pretty daunting question. If there's no single villain to defeat, if the power is in the very architecture of the system itself, how can a nation ever gain enough economic freedom to truly break the cycle?